I've seen a few LinkedIn Europe bashing articles this week comparing, for example, Anthropic's raise to European venture. You kind of can't compare. They're not comparing oranges and oranges. I think it'll be interesting to see. How we take the applications and how Europe carves its own path in the world as these things settle in. And let's settle into some interesting AI infra stories this week. Now, for most of our discussions about AI, we've basically been looking at NVIDIA and all the GPU stories. Now, we've got 3-4 different infra stories, starting with memory. So let's just pick up on this one first. CapEx, it looks like, just to tee it up, it looks like CapEx is going wider into memory software and beyond. And starting on the memory side, we've had a couple of companies cross the $1 trillion mark. Give us the insight into what's happening in memory, Mads.
It's super interesting how memory has suddenly become the hottest thing on the planet. And you're absolutely right. We saw Micron and SK Hynix cross the $1 trillion threshold this week. And memory is one of those businesses where, for the history buffs will remember that Intel used to be a memory business. And they got out of memory in 1985 because memory was always a very low margin, highly cyclical, very capex intensive business. And so in the early 80s, Japanese suppliers like NEC and Hitachi and Toshiba, they crushed Intel on price. And Andy Grove basically said, listen, we've got to get out of this. And that's why they pivoted to CPUs. And then they had, 30, 35 years of excellent results being the world's dominant CPU maker. So that sort of saved them. For 40 years after getting out of memory, Andy Grove and Intel were right because it was a famously cyclical business. It was boom and it was bust. And every time there was a boom, everybody would pile in and add capacity. And then when it was bust, all those people that added capacity during boom, they would die. So companies that were if you look back 25 years, come up with the major DRAM players, Toshiba, PowerChip, ProMOS, Nanya, Inotera, they're all gone. It was the same pattern every single time. And there were sort of 3 survivors left. 3 survivors standing. It was SK Hynix and Micron that are specialists, and then Samsung, which is just generally a powerhouse. So, yeah. They could do a lot of things and have a fabulous balance sheet. And then suddenly AI and GPUs happen. And this has been the absolutely nuts pattern we've seen over the last 2 years, because you've had a compounding growth in demand for memory. First of all, GPUs are famously memory hungry. You need a lot of memory to run the big AI models, and that sits in the GPUs. And so you've seen an explosion in the shipment of GPUs. In 2024, there was 3.4 million units shipped. This year, we're looking at 8 to 9 million. So you've seen between a doubling and a tripling of the capacity, growing roughly 50% a year. But what's happening in the meantime is that as AI models have gotten bigger, the amount of memory you put on each GPU has also grown by about 80% a year. Mm-hmm. So you've had more units needing much more memory. And in a capacity-constrained industry, that's gone bananas. And so,
any new players come in this time, Mads? Do you know?
None. No, it takes years to stand up this stuff.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen historically is that people pile in boom times and then they go bust in bear times. And that's why nobody has really been adding new capacity, because it takes too long. And everybody is looking at this and thinking, even if we add capacity for the stuff that's in most demand right now, well, guess what? We're going to be at the next generation of memory 2 years from now when that capacity
the Chinese
stood up.
Might. I thought the Chinese, it might be something that, obviously they're looking to be like a properly self-contained sovereign nation. I thought we might see.
They've been hit by the HBM, kind of the high bandwidth memory shortage as much as anybody, because even if they can stand up and create GPUs, they've not been able to get access to the memory. So it's a gap that's been difficult to close. It's not going to close this year. It's probably not going to close next year, maybe not even in 2028. And so that's what we're seeing in these memory makers, and why their revenue is just going through the roof and margins are exploding in ways we've never seen before for memory. At the same time, something else has happened. Capacity discipline almost never held, as you said. Historically, someone always defected and said, okay, great, it's boom time. Let me add more capacity. That's why it was a dreadful business for 40 years. Now, today, you sort of have an agreement amongst the three that nobody is piling in big time. And there is a suspicion that the buyers of the memory, so the kind of the semiconductor, the chip, the GPU makers, they don't want there to be masses of new capacity built because they're worried that the memory suppliers are just going to go bust in a few years. So you almost have a bit of a tacit agreement. There's a super interesting pattern, and it seems like margins are going to be high in memory land for some time to come.
My theory is that we are going to not need the capex spend. I've said this before. We've had a bit of a tussle over it, but I don't think we're going to need the 100x growth in this whatever capex spend from whomever. We're going to need 5x, 3x, 5x, something like that we are currently seeing. But it feels like, I mean, obviously it makes sense for the RAM people and the memory people to not then, go crazy on supply. But I'm just wondering, in general, all of this capex stuff, all of the stuff that we're talking about in this segment, I mean, I can't see us needing this ad infinitum. Is that? Do you agree? Do you feel
that's a truism. So look, that's a truism. I think as with memory, if you look at the wider world, every time you have a space that's hot, everybody piles in, everybody invests, and at some point you're going to overbuild. It's just human nature, right? There's always going to be somebody who defects and invests more and wants to try and grab that marginal a bit of capacity and a marginal bit of market share. And then the market turns or you reach a new plateau. So I think that happens for sure. You're saying we're not going to need 100 times more. I think that's fair. I mean, if we are thinking about hyperscalers now, if we just take those 700 billion of capex investment, I mean, they're not going to need 70 trillion, right? I mean, they're not going to need 100 times more than where they are. But even if it's 5 times or 10 times more, that's still a massive explosion from where we are today.
Yeah.